Prayer is, I think, a very important part of Western culture.
It fosters a sense of community, a sense of belonging.
I can best describe it in an image. To me, prayer is like a dance in which we dance with God.
Prayer is universal. It belongs to the entire human race. It isn't restricted to particular denominations.
I think that we all have a gift of healing.
Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. It's His will.
Despite the vast differences in religious practices and beliefs around the world, there is one element which is common to all of the human search for meaning. And that element is the act of prayer. If you think about it for a minute, how many of us can honestly say that we've never uttered the phrase, "God help me," or "Please God, one more chance"? Now obviously that's a really simple example. But there is evidence of prayer dating back to the earliest human civilization, some 15,000 years ago, in central and western France. On the walls of the caves there are paintings of images of hands in postures of healing, of praying. But despite that long tradition, the question remains, does it do us any good? The answer is an overwhelming yes, if recent studies are to be believed. Those studies showed that prayer can reduce blood pressure, it can relieve chronic pain and depression, and you probably know from your own experience that you don't have to travel very far before you'll meet someone who will tell you with absolute certainty that their cancer was cured through their prayers. But it doesn't work all the time, and it doesn't work for all of us. So the question for us is why and why not? I'm Peter Downie. I hope you'll join us for this special presentation, The Power Within, Healing Through Prayer.
My wife was in the hospital. She had a heart attack. I met the doctor in the hall immediately following the operation, and he said everything was fine, no problems at all. It was a big one. I had to replace 6 veins, which is the max. But he said everything went well. Go and have your dinner, and you can come back and see her. So we went out and had dinner and came back, and the roof had fallen in. And she'd had 2 cardiac arrests, and the nursing staff in the ICU had brought her back both times. But she was on every kind of life support you can think of. And she was like that completely out of it for at least 15 days, 16 days. She didn't move a muscle. She knew we were there. I remember one time, I said some prayers in the morning before I left. As I walked across, it stopped at a stoplight. I've forgotten which street it was, but I thought I heard someone speak behind me, and there was nobody there, but this voice kept saying, "Don't worry, I'm taking care of her." We have a prayer chain at the church, and she was immediately put on a prayer chain, and she got better. She was there for about a month and came home 2 days before Christmas, so it was quite a Christmas present.
Prayer provides the sense that God is close, that God is listening, that God cares. And if you feel that God cares about you, because you care about God, that can give a person tremendous strength, spiritual strength. And spiritual strength can overcome virtually any physical circumstance.
This is Harvard Medical School, arguably one of the finest of its kind in the world. Dr. Herbert Benson is a respected associate professor of medicine here, but beyond that, he truly is a pioneer in the field of mind-body medicine. He's the author of several books on the subject, including this latest called Timeless Healing, The Power and Biology of Belief. There's so much material about prayer and healing now in the marketplace. I just wonder, from your perspective, what are you absolutely sure of about that relationship?
We know that certain types of prayer elicit a set of physiologic changes in the body. When there is a repetition and For example, Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is my shepherd, Shema Yisrael, Om Mani Padme Hum. It doesn't matter what they are. It can be any word, any sound, any prayer, any phrase, even a repetitive muscular activity. It will work independently of belief system. Just carry out that procedure. Close your eyes, relax your muscles, choose a word or prayer of your choosing, and then repeat it. Other thoughts come to mind, oh well, and back to the repetition. There is decreased metabolism, decreased heart rate, decreased rate of breathing, slower brain waves. And in fact, to the extent that any disorder is caused or made worse by stress, to that extent that this type of repetition is carried out, you can effectively treat and cure stress-related diseases.
I don't want to skip over the importance of the stress-related diseases. You have statistics in timeless healing that are really quite remarkable about the number of people who visit hospitals or doctors with stress-related issues.
60 to 90% of visits to doctors are in the stress-related mind-body realm, and they're poorly treated, if treated at all, by pharmaceuticals and surgery and procedures. These include angina pectoris, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, duodenal ulcers, all forms of pain, skin rashes. Death itself can be caused by belief system.
They're treated then how? I mean, what would you say is the best way to approach that kind of a medical problem?
The best way to look at overall health is to view it as being akin to a three-legged stool, being held up by one leg of pharmaceuticals, drugs, another leg of surgery and procedures, but a third leg of self-care. We tend to think of medicine as being primarily those first two legs, drugs or surgery.
Well, do it for us.
Yeah, do it to us. Do it to us, as opposed to self-care. And in that self-care leg, we have the quieting relaxation response, the aspects of nutrition, aspects of exercise, stress management, and the patient's belief system as well.
In fact, researchers now recognize the enormous power of the human belief system and how it can either cure or kill the patient. Dr. Stephen Kosslyn, a colleague of Herbert Benson's at Harvard, conducted an experiment with a type of X-ray called the PET scan. Subjects were shown the letter A on a grid. Then a picture of the grid was removed, and patients were asked to close their eyes and imagine the grid and the A from memory. The second set of PET scans revealed that the brain reacted the same way to imagining the grid as it had to actually seeing the grid.
That means, from the brain's point of view, whether you're actually looking at something or think you're looking at it, it's both reality. They're both reality. In fact, in England, this minister was allergic to flowers, and he made the point he would do any service unless there were flowers, and he wouldn't do funerals or what have you when there were flowers. And this was serious. He would go into anaphylactic shock when he had flowers around him. He could die from it. Well, he was called to do a funeral. He reminded the people that there shouldn't be flowers. They agreed. He went there, and a woman showed up with a dozen roses, and he developed an anaphylactic reaction to it, had to be taken to the hospital. Later, he confronted the woman. We had this agreement. And she said they were plastic flowers. Now, just as we are wired to turn something on, we can be wired to turn it off. And for many, the most powerful belief is belief in God. In America, some 95% of people believe in God. If you believe in God, you have an illness, and you're healed, and God doesn't exist, you're still healed. Let's assume you believe in God, you have an illness, that illness is healed, and God does exist. Isn't it wonderful? So either way, from the narrow viewpoint of medicine and healing, belief and belief in God is good for you. It's what we call a win-win situation.
We had a son called Paul who was 6 months old, and it was a week before Christmas, and he was teething, and it was 4 on a Saturday morning, and I carried him downstairs by the light of the Christmas tree, and what I didn't see was a pile of books, and I went head over heels, and he hit his head badly, and I thought he was going to be all right, and I tucked him up in bed beside me between my wife and myself. And then a couple of hours later, he was very pale and he began to be sick. So I rang my partner and said, I don't want to bother you on a Saturday morning, but would you come and have a look? And he said, well, I can't see anything wrong, but I think we better take him up to the hospital. And he was desperately ill by the time we got there. His brain was squashed into 1/5 of his skull, and the rest of the skull was filled with blood. And the surgeon sat us down and he said he got about a 30% chance of surviving. The week before this event, my wife Mary and I had been asked in our church to set up a prayer chain. And the concept of a prayer chain was that if somebody is sick, you ring people through the church. So there are a lot of people praying. Very simple. I never imagined I'd be the first to use the prayer chain. Amazingly, we went up to the ward for Paul to have his head shaved. And there on the ward was our pastor, our minister, who'd been on the prayer chain. 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, he'd got the message. He got on a train, gone up to London, and dropped everything else. And he said, let's pray. And 2 of the nurses on the ward joined us. And we laid hands on Paul and prayed for him and anointed him with oil for healing. And he had 3 very long hours in the operating theatre. And then he was not really conscious for 2 days. And then after 5 days, he was moving and well. He's now 13. He's at grammar school. He's completely well. For me, that was a miracle. You can explain it medically that it was one of the 30% cases that did wonderfully well. But it was the power of prayer and the skill of medicine combining that brought a wonderful outcome for us.
For Gareth Tuckwell, a physician and devout Christian, prayer and faith played a significant role in the miraculous recovery of his son, Paul. But what does science say about the power of prayer, beyond what Herbert Benson termed the relaxation response?
A lot of people came to me and said, I've been to a psychic healer and it really helped me in my recovery. Somebody prayed for me, I prayed for myself, and that's why I'm getting better. From the psychiatric point of view, we would expect somebody to feel better if they meet with a kind and well-intentioned person who says to them, what I'm going to do now is going to help you. We already know that mind and expectation have profound impact on the physiology of the body. The question, though, really is there something more? And that's what many people believe. And I really felt that we had a responsibility, that I had a responsibility to investigate that, to answer the question.
I am fascinated by the fact that even though I may be on one side of the earth and you may be on the other, your prayer, your empathic, loving regard for me could change my physiology.
If people are directing their thoughts to one person, does it make any difference?
Is there some kind of magic? Is there something just about one person wishing or intending well for the other that could really make a difference?
Dr. Larry Dossey, physician and best-selling author of several books on prayer and healing, has spent decades studying the effectiveness of prayer, in particular, long-distance prayer. Dr. Elizabeth Targ recently conducted an experiment in San Francisco involving long-distance prayer for the treatment of AIDS patients.
We were given pictures of the people and their first name. And also we knew that they had AIDS. I didn't even know where they were located. They were in San Francisco or the East Coast or whatever. We didn't know that. So what it is, I took the picture and just focused on this man. And it is amazing, you know, if you put your intent and focus into something, somehow you make the connection.
We selected them on the basis that they're all people who have a professional practice in healing, that they have all been doing this work for at least 5 years.
And it was amazing to me that I could even hear their thoughts through this connection.
The randomization and the healing was done in a double-blind fashion. What that means is the patients did not know whether or not they were in the healing group. Also, the experimenters did not know.
They were either angry or they were happy, and it was amazing how we communicated just through this picture. We didn't even need a phone.
There have been a large number of studies done over the years in many different laboratories showing that an individual sitting in the laboratory is actually able to give a description of an object or an event or a place that's at a long distance, where there would be no other means for them getting information about that place. If an individual can give a description of what's happening in London right now, that means what's happening in London right now is affecting that individual. And once we have that link, which has now, I think, been very well established, it opens the door to understanding how changes in the consciousness of one person might affect the consciousness and thereby the physical and emotional well-being of another person.
Dr. Elizabeth Targ recently released the results of her study, and while she clearly acknowledges that the study was a small one and was confounded by some baseline age differences, the results are exciting. In the treatment group, there were no deaths reported as compared to 4 out of 10 in the control group. And also in the treatment group, there were fewer doctor visits, fewer hospital stays, and less emotional distress was reported. Dr. Targ's conclusion, this is an important area for further exploration.
If you're being prayed for and you know about it, your belief could be in prayer, could be allowing that to cure you, to heal you. In other words, it may not be the prayer, but your belief in the prayer. But when you don't know the prayer is going on, then it's another ballpark. And if that's occurring, then hold on, because then that would be another sphere of healing that our current science cannot explain.
Science can't explain it, but not for want of trying. Perhaps the challenging combination of science and spirituality is best embodied in Dr. John Polkinghorne, a preeminent physicist, past president of Queen's College in Cambridge, and an Anglican priest.
Science is looking at an impersonal world that it can put to the test. Religion is looking at a personal and the transpersonal world involving God, where testing has to give way to trusting. But they have enough in common, I think, to be friends rather than enemies.
I think theologians and people who are given to religious practices that honor the power of prayer ought to take a deep breath and relax and cease to worry that science is going to debase prayer. I think it's going to honor it.
I personally think that science is possible, because we live in a world that's a creation, that's why it is orderly, and we are creatures made in the image of our Creator. That's why our minds are somehow apt to discern the patterns, the beautiful patterns of nature which science investigates.
I can assure you that although science will unravel some of the mystery of prayer, for every question that it answers, it's going to raise a dozen more questions that it can't answer.
We're more than just biochemical machines. We've come to realize that what we are as persons interacts with the physical way our bodies are performing, and vice versa, so that we have to ideally treat the whole person in disease, in being seriously ill. A person's attitude, a person's hope, a person's expectation will have very important consequences for their powers of recovery.
Spirituality is back in medicine. We have a window of opportunity here to rehumanize modern medicine and to help spirituality make friends with science. We have not had such a fertile opportunity in this century.
Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could have the awesome, awesome cures that modern scientific medicine has given us, and to that add our belief system with its power, rather than going to a either-or situation.
I grew up in northern Manitoba, and I was very sick when I was 9 years old, and the doctor said that I would die because whatever it was, I don't know what I had. All I know is I was losing my hair, I wasn't eating, I was really sick. And it was just before Easter, and there was a young man there who happened to be Catholic, and he said, you know, Stanley, that was my dad's name, we believe that, you know, about holy water. You know, if you go early Easter morning and get water from the river and have your daughter drink it and wash her head with it, she will get better. And the whole camp prayed that I would get better. And I did. Obviously, I'm here. I think I was healed so that I would become who I am and be a living example that God heals people.
On the front lines are the healers, some of whom are linked to traditions learned at the feet of their elders. But there isn't one standard mold. Healers represent all nations and all faiths, and they can come from divinity schools or medical schools. In fact, some say we are all healers.
One of the volunteers came and said, Barbara, there's a young lady here. She just had twins and they found cancer. So she said, I think you should go and pray with her. And she said, because I think you're the one. And I just kind of, you know, wandered into the room. And here was this young couple, you know, crying because probably the cancer would not be able to be healed. I was standing beside her bed, and I was just praying, just from the depths of my being. And all of a sudden I had this feeling come through me and into her. And I knew that God was there. She came back for tests 2 weeks later, no more cancer.
I haven't been doing this for very long, but I did have a woman come to me one day and said that she really did experience the flow of something flowed into her.
There is a general consensus that something passes from the person who's laying on the hands, for example, to the person who's being healed, and that some form of energy transference is happening. And I believe as a Christian, when I pray, that the Holy Spirit is touching these people through me.
Things like Reiki, like healing touch and therapeutic touch, and some of those therapies which the medical establishment is now starting to call complementary, which I think in a way is kind of funny because in a way they are prior to the medical establishment, and maybe medicine is in fact complementary to those other therapies.
I was born a Christian and I was raised in a household that prayed. And even though I've been a Buddhist since the mid-1960s, prayer is a very active part of my life. And it's a very active part of my practice with people who are dying and with families of dying people.
What you're working with is someone who has a diagnosis that's terminal. And often those people come to us after the moment when someone has said to them the dreaded phrase, sorry, there's nothing more we can do for you. And what we say in palliative care is, there may be nothing we can do to cure you, but there's so much we can do to make sure that you're comfortable and to ensure that the quality of life, however long it is really the best possible for you.
You can't care for someone physically and expect them to get better if their spiritual needs are not also recognized and met.
I will do whatever I can medically, and I will continue to love and support that person for the duration. And I think, so in a way, I am beaming some energy towards them. But I'm not kind of closing my eyes and doing a particular thing, although sometimes I do that too. I mean, sometimes when I left Gail, this woman who I knew was going to die imminently, and I was on the plane, I kind of closed my eyes and sent her loving thoughts and thoughts to be courageous and thoughts that it was okay to let go.
While I was going to medical school, I developed a terminal brain tumor. And I was given about a month mostly to live. It was on my pituitary gland. And about 30 years ago, it was impossible. It was inoperable. The death was very close. The light was already coming to me. And I knew that I would, in a few minutes, I would be not anymore alive. But I said, well, stop. I want to know before I go to this other side. I would like to know what has been my purpose in life. And the purpose of my life wasn't very clear to me. So I decided then that I'm not going anyplace before I know the purpose of my life. And that was the decision that started the healing process. I believe that there has to be a higher source that we connect before we start doing the work. Because I believe all this energy and so-called power, if you want to call it, comes from above. I feel I am just a medium, a channel that takes this power, and with my intent, I take this energy and I direct it.
I was personally having some problems getting pregnant, staying pregnant, being healthy when I was pregnant, and whatever I was doing at the time, which was a straightforward medical approach, didn't seem to be working all that well. She made me analyze what I was doing in terms of how I viewed pregnancy versus my very busy, stressful life. What I was trying to do was, at that point, compartmentalize the pregnancy away from all the other things that were particularly unhealthy or stressful or non-supportive. The proposal was to integrate pregnancy, and she started teaching me about the communication between the mother and the baby during the entire pregnancy. Although this is controversial, some communication with the soul of a child before you actually become pregnant. We knew the day that I conceived was a medically inopportune day when I was not on any hormones for the first time in 2 years. I had recently had a tubal pregnancy, had one tube left, and we didn't know yet, because I just recently had surgery, if that tube was open. The next day we had the then 4-year-old go out and throw a rope up into the clouds as though he were trying to rope his brother. And so he, to this day, believes that he went out and roped his brother out of the clouds. And the little one believes that he was in the clouds and was roped in by the family, which is a visual analog of probably what, at least I believe, happened after working with April. You can take what you need from Western allopathic medicine, you can take what you need or would like to work with spirituality, and they are certainly not mutually exclusive. In fact, I think that they work better together than either apart.
One of the meccas of healing today is in England. It's a center called Burswood, and its goal is to heal the whole person in a unique approach to healthcare.
When I went to Burswood, the Christian Healing Center in England, I saw how they work within the mystery of healing and suffering, that suffering is a part of living. And one of the doctors at Burswood once said to me, you know, Christian healing it's the strength to live, the strength to suffer, and the strength to die. Burswood is a very beautiful place. It's set in 290 acres of land. It's a huge, beautiful old English mansion.
It's a Christian centre for healthcare and ministry. It was founded by Dorothy Karen 50 years ago this year, and she was a lady who had an amazing, miraculous healing, and following that, God spoke to her in a dream and said, I've called you back, Dorothy, to heal the sick, to comfort the sorrowing, to give faith to the faithless.
Every day we have a meeting, doctors and priests, counsellors, physiotherapists and nurses, so that with the patient we can work out the best care for every part of them.
People can come here whether they're off their feet or walking wounded, and it's bringing the church and medicine together.
People have come here and been healed, and sometimes the healing has really been physical healing, and sometimes it's been in the emotions, and sometimes they've been given strength and grace so that they can cope with things that are on top of them.
now I can't see healing in any other light other than being all-encompassing.
There is a team around each patient, and there's obviously the doctor and the nurse and the therapist, maybe physiotherapist, and the chaplain, the important part. And the fifth member of the team is the patient. Go to the patient and say, look, this is what we feel is right for you. Now, what do you feel? Perhaps you could tell us. And they listen to the patient then. And I think that is what I call all-round care.
So curing is about a physical process. Healing involves the whole of ourselves, our families, our whole being, which the physical part is just a little bit. I have witnessed things I can't explain as a doctor. A man came here who was told he had 3 months to live with terminal cancer. And we had a letter 7 years later, last year, telling us how well he was and that he was now married and had a young family.
When we lay hands on people, we're not saying, I'm doing anything special. I'm just a channel for God's grace and love, compassion and healing to come to people.
The older we get, I guess the more we look at the meaning of life. And that's the beginning of looking at spiritual needs. It's been said that where life has no meaning, there is real spiritual pain, deep spiritual pain. And I believe that is true, and that manifests itself in illness. We have to get away from white coats and long corridors and feeding symptoms into a computer and expecting a diagnosis to come out. Because we're more than a label, more than a diagnosis. We're a person.
When I came out of the closet, it was like for 7 years I hardly talked to my family. And there was definitely no religion, near me at that time. And then when I found out I was HIV positive, it was like I had to come out of the closet with that again. I was scared that I was going to be a burden to all those people that loved me. And luckily, these people came around me, friends of mine that just started to support me and edged so much love back to me. And people calling me up and saying, I don't like to say it, but I'm praying for you. And I said, cool, that's very cool. And they made me feel better. I think it's really hard for people to ask for help. I think it was it's just something I've learned recently. Asking for help is okay. I pray every night when I go to bed, and thanks God for just the day, or to help somebody out, and thank you for bringing this friend back into my life. I was very lucky that the medications started to come around. When I was diagnosed, the doctor told me I had 3 years to live. That was 6 years ago. And I really feel that I got my life given back to me with 47 years of wisdom.
Over and over again, we hear stories about healing and sometimes even of miraculous cures. People getting their lives back, at least partially due to prayer and to a profound faith. But what about those people who don't heal? Is it possible that their prayers just weren't good enough, or that there is a kind of a capricious God who heals some and not others?
God is so much bigger than us. God is our creator, and we can never figure out God. If we did, God would not be God.
Creatures are not part of God's puppet theatre, in which God pulls every string and makes everything happen. We are allowed to be ourselves, just as the world is allowed to make itself. That's the theological understanding of an evolutionary world. So many things happen in the world which are not in accord with God's will.
I can never answer the question, why did that person die and this one lived, say in a plane crash? Perhaps there was no reason for it except where they happened to be sitting in the plane.
Somebody once asked, what was God's will in the Lisbon earthquake? It happened in 1755 on All Saints' Day. The churches were full, they collapsed, 50,000 people were killed. A terrible, terrible natural disaster. The answer he gave was, which is a very hard answer, but I think a true answer, God's will was that the elements of the earth's crust should behave in accordance with their nature.
Well, I think that we sometimes accuse God of not listening to our prayers, or saying no all the time. But he hasn't heard us. I believe he has heard us. Heavenly Father has it. And his no's to our requests are answers.
When you pray for healing, nothing never happens. Something always happens.
We believe there's always a response. May not always be the response we want to hear, but we believe that there's a response.
We deceive ourselves on the difference between an answered prayer and an unanswered prayer. Most of us can see that an answered prayer is a prayer we offer for which we get a yes answer. But no is a perfectly good answer to prayer.
I don't believe in an intervening God, because to me intervention suggests that God does things occasionally. He watches what's going on and suddenly it's getting out of hand. I'll change this, or I'll help somebody today. I think God interacts with the world. God is continuously interacting with the world, but God does not overrule the world.
We only want to accept the answers from God that we're looking for. We don't always want to accept no.
But when he slams a door in our face, he usually opens another. And that's something that we've got to be ready for. That he's got an agenda for us, and he's taking us on this journey to wholeness, on a bit further, whatever that may be.
This world is not a world in which there is an automatic reward for good and evil. There is a world, I think, a life beyond this world, in which part of which will be involve judgment, which people will see themselves as they really are, and that will be a painful realization for all of us.
In our look at the extensive world of healing and prayer, we heard many comments about evil or negative prayer. In a larger sense, it is a subject which many people have trouble not only discussing, but even acknowledging. We became increasingly aware that almost all of our experts and healers had had some encounter with evil.
Besides being a Buddhist priest, I'm also an anthropologist, and one of the things I have done over the many years that I've been, in the discipline of anthropology, is to look at the ways in which people pray across many cultures, and also to look at the ways that, people think ill of each other, negative prayer across many cultures. And I think this stuff works. I can't say how it works, but there are so many extraordinary examples cross-culturally of the effect of the benefit of prayer and also the non-benefit of negative prayer. And Larry Dossey and quite a few others have brought forth very interesting insights about the power of prayer.
I stumbled into the results of a Gallup poll which revealed that 5% of Americans actually pray for harm for other people. And this is just the 1 in 20 who will admit it.
I think it would be very foolish to dismiss the possibility that there are evil spiritual forces who can be contacted and who can, in some sense, be collaborated with.
I had a woman come to me 2 years ago who didn't do any praying much until she'd heard about praying in the negative way. That is, praying, going into the silence. Just dive into, and she had some wonderful experiences at first. She had several wonderful experiences of diving into the transcendent, into the beyond. But then, because nobody taught her, and she didn't learn anything about it, bang! She had terrible negative experiences. She went into fits. She started frothing at the mouth, and an evil spirit threatened her and said he was going to control her, and she lost control of herself. When she was telling me about it, it happened in my presence.
You take this energy, and what I was saying, what is your intent? Do you want to use it for positive or negative? You put all your hatred, you put these evil thoughts and negativity into it. And when you send it out, it is like a impact that gets you and you don't know what it was.
If you think of a terrible, terrible incident like, say, the Holocaust, you can see a lot of reasons about how these terrible things happened. There were determined and evil men leading the Nazis. There was a political system which inculcated unhesitating obedience to the state. People were scared for their lives and they looked the other way when the cattle trucks rattled through the village. But when you've taken all those things into account, there is a weight of evil involved there, which seems to me to exceed that you can explain in simply human terms. So I think that there can be non-human evil forces, and no doubt in a sort of reversal of prayer, there will be some people who will try and invoke those evil forces, and that is a sad and terrible thing to do.
We have had crusades, we have had inquisitions, we have had religious wars. I wonder, you know, how much really true love of God is in all these happenings.
Take, for example, the case of an Australian Aborigine, 18 years old, whose particular hex was wild game hen. He was told, don't eat wild game hen. He went to a friend's home who said, here's some dinner. Gave him wild game hen, but lied about it. He ate it, felt fine, left, didn't come back for 2 years. At which point the friend said to him, I tricked you, I gave you wild game hen. Within 24 hours, the now 20-year-old died.
The healthcare setting is an example of the frequent use of random comments which have the effects of a curse, a hex, or a spell. Now, this may seem far removed from negative prayer, and doctors aren't actually praying to harm other people, and they aren't intentionally trying to do us in by their casual comments. But often these comments have tremendously negative influences and can even kill people.
Death itself can be caused by a belief system. If you believe in voodoo and you have a hex on you, you will die.
Doctors say occasionally to someone, you have 6 months to live. Every physician knows that this is a very serious comment because people can live out this prediction and literally die on time, as if on cue.
People going into surgery who are not just fearful of death, but who are convinced they're going to die. They know they're going to die. 100% of them will die.
When we pray for someone with an infection, for example, AIDS or serious pneumonia, when we pray for them to get well, we are asking for the murder or for the destruction of those viruses or those bacteria that are causing that problem. So you see, the ability to harm other living things with our intentions and our prayers may be a terrific gift if we use it wisely.
Using the gift of prayer wisely, or even using it at all, might be something new to you. At this stage, if you think you might believe in the power of prayer, then you're probably wondering how to begin.
Like most people, I grew up thinking that prayer was something you did. It was a specific activity locked into particular periods of the day, maybe around bedtime, perhaps associated with meals, saying grace, and so on.
How do you pray, or how do you learn how to pray? That's something that we begin teaching our children as soon as they begin to speak.
One of the things we see in the laboratory studies dealing with prayer is that some people achieve better effects than others. And this raises the question of whether or not there's a skill factor in prayer. Are some people better prayers than others?
I believe very much in the power of silent prayer, which is not practiced in our denomination, but maybe is practiced in the Quaker religion, for example, where there are times of silence, and people, you would think that when there's times of silence, people will be bored, but they're actively asking God to be with them and to feel His presence, and so this energizes them.
Another way to pray, which is very unusual and is Buddhist, by the way, is to feel deep love for the person whom you're sitting with who is dying, and to actually breathe in their suffering as dark, heavy, hot smoke, and to let it break open your own sense of self-importance, and to let the mercy of your heart open vastly, and to let that suffering dissolve into emptiness. And then on the out-breath, sending a breath that is cool and light and that is healing, the deep aspiration that this one suffering can be transformed.
If I had to single out one quality that correlates with effective prayer in these tests, it would be something that sounds, I'm afraid, very old-fashioned. It's the factor and quality of love.
Love is not only a vision of a world as completely interconnected, but living in a way that realizes the sense of oneness to the best that we're able.
When you love another person, that person dwells in your heart. Isn't that right? If you love another person, you dwell in that person's heart. Even if the person goes to Australia, your two hearts are one. Everybody knows that. Well, where did it come from? It came from religion. Originally, it was in religion before we had it in romance.
In the gospel, a blind man comes to Jesus and stands before him. And Jesus says to him, "What do you want?" I mean, it's perfectly obvious what he wants. He's a blind man, for heaven's sake. He wants his sight, but he has to say that. He has to commit himself. Say, "Lord, that I may see." In fact, before he's healed. And I think that's part of prayer too, saying what you really value, what you really want.
Words often get in the way, I think, and we talk at God and give him a shopping list. We don't give God time to say something to us. We don't listen to him enough. And I feel that prayer is ever a two-way thing of communication with God. And we must listen to him as much as we expect him to listen to us.
We have desire to be a successful person. We have a desire to be loved. We have a desire to be happy in a marriage. We have a desire to make a lot of money. We need money. We have desire to have the latest technology, to be into the net, you know. We have desires, endless number. You can name all those desires. But under all those desires, there's a very powerful one, which I call the big ache, that none of those, even when they're satisfied, will ever get rid of.
But we can also pray for a good and peaceful death. We can also pray that suffering be transformed. We can pray to accept suffering. We can pray to forgive others or to ask others to forgive us. We can ask God to forgive us. And I think that prayer is actually one of the strongest contributions to a contemplative or spiritual approach to dying that I know of.
It's a good idea to have a lot of people praying for the same thing. Not because there are more fists beating on the heavenly door to attract the divine attention or make a more fuss, so to speak, but simply because there are more wills to be aligned with the divine will to bring about good consequences in the unfolding history of the world.
To a Muslim who obviously believes in God, he's required to communicate on a regular basis. It is the remembrance of God, and this remembrance is continued in the prayer 5 times a day.
When so-called distracting thoughts keep coming into our minds when we're trying to pray, there's a good reason for that. Because sometimes God is bringing to our awareness someone that we need to pray for, something that we've been avoiding thinking about maybe. So you always have to be discerning when you're praying about what the distractions are. Are they just distractions and you can just let them be part of the unfocused background? Or are they ways in which your unconscious and God, who I think works through our unconscious, is trying to say there's something here you have to deal with that you're avoiding?
I think we ought to feel free to experiment with different forms of prayer as we mature and go through life.
I think anyone can pray, just simply being with God, listening to him, talking to him, and just being there.
I was baptized as a Catholic and did receive First Communion and that, but was not a practicing Catholic. My sister, she's the only person in the whole family that has really been in any way formal with her religion. I was not a regular prayerful person. I didn't pray all the time. Sometimes I did. Did feel grateful for a very good life overall. And then last April and May, I started getting a pain on my side around the rib cage. And then I started getting a shortness of breath, and then by May of last year, I knew that something very different was happening, that I was obviously sick. Finally, the specialist sent me off for a bone scan and a CAT scan, and the bone scan revealed numerous tumors, and they were obviously secondary to a primary cancer somewhere. So we went for a mammogram and found the left breast primary tumor, and then by then, of course, it was in the left lung and bones. So it became from what I thought was being perfectly healthy to being a stage 4 cancer just in a week. My sister works for the Anglican church, so they immediately started including me in prayers. One of my ex-teachers wrote to say that she had sent the information to the Sisters of Mercy in Ireland, and they were putting me in the prayer. So anyway, within a matter of weeks, I was being prayed for, and prayed for a recovery, or for, to be able to stand whatever would happen, from Catholics, Anglicans, Muslims, Jews. A woman friend of mine ultimately connected me to a spiritual healer in the States. And this man is a Catholic priest, and he is very highly regarded, apparently. And it just so happened that the Father Fred phone call came in the middle of the night, kind of on a Sunday night. And then that Thursday was the first time that the tumors appeared to reduce. So for me, it had significance. I did try the whole idea of visualization and seeking to reduce the cancers and visualizing them getting smaller and all of those things that they suggest. The fact that the tumors are reducing is really unusual. It is not typical of a stage 4 at the stage that they got me at, and with the number of tumors that appear to be present. It is not to be expected that the tumors would actually be reducing in size. There is a lot of strength out of the feeling, no matter how badly you're feeling at a particular point in time, in thinking there are others reaching out for me, and so you do feel that you're part of a big group of people that are all pulling for the same thing. So it's been very helpful that way. I have really not been allowed to consider feeling defeated.
In my mind, in my heart, I know that's the prayer that has helped her.
The fact that you love people and you want to see the children grow, you want to be with them. So all of that to me speaks of a sort of a power of love that somehow has to be related to whatever cosmic God exists. And it's based on that belief that I continue to want to believe that I can make a difference to getting better for myself.
Human beings have always formed clubs or groups. It seems our desire to be part of a community is part of our nature. Now, that's a good thing when that community is supportive and sharing, but it's not healthy when it's closed and exclusive. Well, prayer is no exception, and we're cautioned against thinking our way is the only way.
In case you haven't noticed, there are a few religious denominations in our culture who do indeed think they have cornered the market on prayer, and they know that God would not answer prayers of any other denominations. The prayer data, the prayer experiments, shows that that is just pure bigotry.
When you are chosen by God, you are in a special category. You are wonderful, but all the other people, they can burn in hell. And I think this is kind of a leftover from this former way to get people to come to the church, that you come to us and we are the door to salvation.
It's one God that does these things for all people. It's not just for Christians or just for Jews, it's for everybody.
There has to be this feeling of unconditional love, and it has to start with myself, and it extends to you and to all the other people.
Religious affiliation is apparently meaningless in these situations. The prayers of virtually any denomination that has ever been tested in the laboratory works.
Prayer seems to work, and you know, whether it's the idea of tachyons, some kind of, you know, atom that moves faster than light, or whether it's that our minds are non-local, that our thoughts are not even ours, that we have, not only our minds are not local, but we're all interconnected with each other. So how can we, you know, anything that I would wish for one being, I would wish in my heart for all beings.
Healing is many things, and it's a very powerful, powerful thing once you learn how to focus, learn how to meditate, learn how to reflect, learn how to rest and relax in God's Spirit.
Prayer is about stopping, it's not about running. And prayer is also about allowing the silence within to be present. And out of that silence comes the truth of prayer.
So in the end, we are left to consider the truth about prayer. Might it be so complex that it demands a lifetime of theological study and devotion from us? Or could it be as simple and gentle as a child's whispered words to God at bedtime? I suppose ultimately we have to decide whether prayer is a waste of our time or a way of making sense of our time here on earth. In the end, each one of us must decide whether prayer will be and can be a part of our lives and of our healing.